The world is in carnage. A war in Israel that's threatening to expand, violent protests in most capital cities, a deeply divided world and a crumbling US president at the center of it all. Joe Biden, the frail and aging president of the United States, is struggling under the immense pressure of a new war in Israel, says Sky News All-Stars Nigel Farage, Esther Krakue and Paul Murray. Despite strong rhetoric condemning the Hamas attacks and a pledge to stand by Israel, the president is being blamed by many for playing a pivotal role in starting the war, says Sky News All-Star Nigel Farage.
You know, the guy is a complete duffer. He is senile, let's just call it what it is. And he is also very responsible for much of what has happened. He was the vice president when the Iran nuclear deal was done. It freed up tens of billions of dollars for the Iranian regime. All they had to do was promise they wouldn't develop nuclear weapons. Well, guess what? They've gone ahead developing nuclear weapons, and they've used that free money to fund Hamas and Hezbollah, and Biden is directly responsible for that catastrophic policy error.
Sky News All-Star Joe Siracusa agrees, saying Joe Biden has blood on his hands.
The world's on fire. I heard a very sensible Republican Senator Tim Scott say that President Biden has blood on his hands. This all began in earnest after his administration turned over $6 billion for the hostages to Iran. And of course, Iran is behind us. And keep in mind also, when the Kane took down those three missiles coming from Yemen by Houthi fighters, and of course, Houthi fighters probably had Iranian technicians sitting right next to them. When the history books are written, Pete, those will be the first opening. That'd be the opening fire of the American war. So we are literally on a war footing in the Middle East, and it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Nigel Farage also added that if Trump was still in power, things would be very different.
It was Trump afterwards, of course, who brought in the Abraham Accords to start to bring Arab countries together with Israel in peace pacts, very successful. Saudi Arabia was on the verge of doing something, and frankly, you know, Biden's visit to Israel, the fact that other leaders wouldn't see him, I thought was very, very significant. And then on the plane going back, he could barely utter a word. So, yeah, you know, the leader of the free world does not inspire great confidence.
The war in Israel has put Joe Biden in a difficult diplomatic situation, trying to balance his public support for Israel without creating further tension with Iran, explains Sky News contributor General Jack Kane.
Yeah, this is really stunning. First of all, I applaud the President of the United States for the speech that he gave last Thursday in connecting Ukraine and Israel and what has taken place here and throwing his support 100% behind Israel. Commend him for that. But he refused to use the word Iran. When Iran is in charge of these proxies and coordinating and approving these acts, and that is shameful in not doing that.
And when asked about a ceasefire, Joe Biden muddled his words and produced a confused response, says Sky News All-Star Kristen Tate.
Is the U.S. supporting the hostages for a ceasefire deal? Why did you?
We should have a ceasefire. Not a ceasefire, we should have the hostages released. And then we can talk.
Yeah, indeed. Of course, the US position is not for a ceasefire. It's for those hostages to be freed. It's a worry, isn't it, Kristen, that he just muddles everything up the whole time?
Of course. I mean, you don't call for a ceasefire when one side has accomplished their goal of killing as many civilians as possible, beheading babies, slaughtering entire families. It's terrifying that this man who is leading our country right now, sending money to Gaza. I mean, how are we going to guarantee that that money won't end up in the hands of Hamas? So at that point, we'd be funding Israel and then simultaneously funding their enemy and essentially fighting a war against ourselves with our own money. The whole thing, it's just disorganized. And this president, it's scary watching him trying to deal with all of this at once.
And it's not only diplomacy that Joe Biden is struggling with. Increased public appearances since the outbreak of the war have meant more classic Biden stumbles and gaffes.
As always, we all know that the hardest part of any speech Joe Biden gives is actually leaving the stage, not slurring incoherently for a half an hour or so trying to read off a teleprompter. Well, turns out he doesn't know how to enter a stage either.
Good afternoon, folks. I'm not introducing me, Mark is. I forgot Mark. I went straight to the podium. I apologize. No problem.
This is just priceless.
Joe Biden's visit to Israel to meet with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was marred by his usual stuttering and stammering, which commentators say was humiliating for the president and for America.
Well, it's a real concern, and I was particularly concerned the other night when I saw Joe Biden at his press conference in Jerusalem. Because that guy didn't know where he was. He didn't know what he was talking about, and he gave the distinct impression that America is clueless. He had cards in his hands, but he was mumbling. Well, I assume he was reading them, but he was mumbling away, and he just left the message for the world to see that America does not have a leader. Let's face facts. If Trump had been president of the United States, this wouldn't have happened. Russia wouldn't be in Ukraine, and the Palestinians, the Hamas, wouldn't have attacked Israel. What we have in the White House is weakness. And everybody knows it. Everybody knows it, and they're taking advantage of it. And that's the thing that could lead to an international conflict, because they see an opportunity, and they just might take it.
Sky News All-Star Esther Krakue agrees, saying Joe Biden's performance in Israel revealed his age and incompetence.
It's been awful. And, the thing is, because there is such a potential for this to become catastrophic and an all-out regional war and potentially a world war, actually the bar is pretty low. So yes, I do agree with you in the sense that Joe Biden didn't completely destroy things, but the bar is very low. I mean, this is still a doddering old man. He described Hamas, which effectively were responsible for firing the misfire into that hospital car park, as the other team. This is not a game of Monopoly. There are no clear winners and losers here. And for him to, it will take a stroke of diplomatic genius for him to be able to properly relay the complicated nature of this crisis. And he's just not up to the task. There's so many things he's not up to the task for. And unfortunately, this is the president that we have at the helm of this crisis. We just have to hope he doesn't make things worse.
Sky News All-Star Paul Murray also weighed in, saying Joe Biden, who is supposed to play a pivotal role in the conflict, is crumbling before our eyes.
And the incredible thing, while the world is at this tinderbox right now, we have this bloke in charge of the United States who crumbles before our very eyes. I'm frightened that he is the one who's supposedly going to be able to pull every lever and create peace in our time.
Yeah, I mean, look, the guy is a complete duffer. He is senile, let's just call it what it is. And he is also very responsible for much of what has happened.
Sky News host James Morrow added the scary realization that the president is coming apart at the seams.
Sometimes I'm not sure what is scarier. The fact that the world is coming apart at the seams, or the fact that the man who is supposed to be leading Western civilization through the turmoil is also, well, coming apart at the seams. Speaking in Philadelphia Friday, Joe Biden had yet another one of his close encounters of the stairs kind. This time when he attempted to mount a small riser to give a speech on how Bidenomics is contributing to a stronger America. Have a look at this. Yikes, good recovery there, sir. Let's have a look at this from another angle and note that this stumble was preceded by that little jog he likes to do to show how vigorous he is.
Former White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney commended Joe Biden on his recent performance in Israel, but admitted the trip wouldn't do much in the way of achieving anything concrete for the president domestically or internationally.
It's a good trip. I've set up half a dozen of these trips for the President of the United States. It was a good trip. It's a nice, gutsy trip. It's a good show of the flag. It's in the middle of an active war zone, etc. He looks presidential. There's no question about it. It sends a really good message both to our friends and to our enemies. Does it change the outcomes any? Probably not. And by the way, that means outcomes in Israel and outcomes here back home domestically for Joe Biden. The president, we fully expect to have him ask for $100 billion worth of support. That's not just for Israel. That's for Israel and for the Ukraine and for a bunch of domestic things. So we have to wait to see if the trip translates into more money back home from Congress. On the political front, he's trying to look like a president. He's trying to look capable. He's trying to sort of beat down those hushed whispers about his mental capacity and so forth. It's very rare, and you and I have talked about this on this show many, many times. It's very rare that foreign policy moves the needle at all in domestic American elections.
And political journalist John Fund explains why Joe Biden showed such strong support for Israel from the outset of the war and the possible ramifications of that domestically.
Having said that, I think that Biden's strong Israel stance certainly helps him in the Jewish community, but there are suspicions among many members of Congress that he went so foursquare for Israel because he wanted to have leverage to prevent them from exercising a Gaza invasion quickly. In other words, the U.S. now has a veto power in effect over much of Israelis' foreign policy, and that is a problem because the Israelis said 10 days ago they would be invading. I'm still waiting. You're still waiting. Many people will make a little bit more, I think.
And John, every day that doesn't happen, every day of waiting, Hamas gets to dig in that much harder, prepare itself for whatever is Israeli invasion.
But despite the war raging, Joe Biden managed to find some time to fit in one of his famous Delaware beach vacations, which was slammed by rapper 50 Cent.